Testing. Testing. Hoping there's no feedback there. So if there's any reverbs or any echoing, please feel free to let me know. Saw one person come in but leave. I'm trying to get started a little earlier tonight. Just a few minutes. Because I have somewhere I have to be. And I got a lot of material to go. That's good. Testing. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and get this show on the road so I can get on the road. Right. Welcome to Panther and Cage. This is Freestyle 11, and I want to express that Panther and Cage is a live stream conversation. It's driven by the social and cultural bigotry that is experienced specifically here within the Brevard County community. It is a discussion that uses real-time feedback in an attempt to contribute to progress by exposing and exploiting the ignorance within the negative and stereotypical mainstream narratives that are used to misguide the political pundits currently. And of course, your relevant comments, they are any relevant comments within this live stream are always encouraged. And if it's your first time joining us, I hope that you are able to participate and find some enjoyment. Okay. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the freestyle episodes are live stream conversations where we don't necessarily have a specific topic of discussion. So we're open, it's an open forum, but we're providing an opportunity to exchange dialogue about whatever. Okay. That includes current events, the topics that break the routine, psychological, social lines of communication. And even if someone in the audience has a question or they desire to come on, we can, this is the kind of episode where you are allowed to participate. Now, we've been covering very in-depth, on a very in-depth examination of the consequences of the broken nuclear Black family structure in the past few months. Okay. In fact, we danced around some of the ideas centered around the negative narratives of the effects that the absentee Black fathers on the Black nuclear family and the impact that it's had on the Black nuclear family. Now, that discussion addressed the undervaluing of uh, gender roles within the Black nuclear family structure, the impact of the underdevelopment of economic opportunities. Specifically, we reference deindustrialization. Okay. We reference survivors of assault, of sexual assault, spousal abuse, coercion, and also the very taboo subject of pedophilia. Okay. Now, we also examined the dropout rates based on the ethnic backgrounds very briefly. We did have an in-depth discussion about families living in poverty. We talked about, briefly talked about drugs, gangs, prostitution, sexual revolution, subversion, and the underpinnings of feminism, right? No, we had to go deeper into that. We didn't get to that episode yet. But we also addressed the political nexus between the single mother and the I don't need a man subculture, okay? There is a potential nexus there, okay? And that deals with some psychological trauma, and we did try to address the beginnings of that, and we started from the institution of the Willie Lynch letter techniques. And then we also said that there was a big conversation to be had, and I really don't want to just have a conversation where I'm telling you about the information it's already lying about. I would rather a large audience participate, or rather a large group of people, and I'm willing to be open about this and have a huge community discussion. But that's going to deal with parental alienation. It's a very touchy subject, but it's a very important subject. Okay. Now, despite there having been hours of material discussed, we still haven't managed to completely cover all the factors associated with the issues impacting Black society. But that's where we got to slide over to current affairs sometimes, and we have to talk about the ones that are currently influencing society, right? So I let that segue me into this current issue.
Walmart saying that it's rolling back its diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. It's one of many companies reviewing their practices from facing considerable pressure from conservatives. So what's Walmart saying now? What are they going to do differently?
Yeah, this is really stemming from that Supreme Court decision back in June of last year, when the Supreme Court ruled that affirmative action in college admissions was no longer viable. So that emboldened these conservative groups to bring their lawsuits and make similar arguments for corporations. So what Walmart's saying is they will no longer give priority treatment to suppliers based on race or gender. They're going to pull out of a prominent gay rights index, and they're not going to renew a 5-year commitment they had made for equity racial centers. So those are just some of the things Walmart's going to do. You're right, other companies are doing this too. Ford, Harley Davidson, Tractor Supply, Lowe's, another company saying they're not going to be instituting their DEI policies any longer. But Walmart's the largest of the companies so far to do so. So we could see other companies make similar moves that could set the tone going forward.
Other companies could set the tone going forward. Now, in the end of 2024, and I want you guys to keep in mind that this conversation was supposed to be had last November, but I didn't get a chance to do that. December was a very busy month. January is kind of just a little tedious right now, but I did have some time to stream, but there was holidays that were coming up and events that I just didn't want to hamper us down with these heavy topics that I'm going to be talking about tonight during those times of celebration. Okay. So I do want to say that this should have been done, I would say, at the beginning of December, but I just didn't have that time to push that out. So keep in mind that that was an older interview, about 2 months old. But at the end of December, I believe, the Costco had mentioned that they were not going to remove their DEI programs. So that was one of the companies that was not removing its DEI programs. And as far as I know, Target is not removing its DEI program. So there are a lot of companies that are trying to remove their DEI programs. And it is a part of a social influence because of, I'm sorry, I had got logged out of there. I had to get back in real quick. All right, there's slightly delayed. However, now that was a video that was from the ABC News Live first that aired, like I said, December, I believe, about Walmart switching to roll back their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies instead of the price. A move that is reflecting the consequences that are the result of the cultural social momentum following the June 2023 Supreme Court 6-3 ruling that ruled that race-conscious affirmative action in college admissions is unconstitutional. Now, the court stated that colleges are free to consider an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life. As such, while colleges and universities can no longer give preferences to students based upon race in an admissions process, they still could consider how race may have played a role in the applicant's life. Okay. Now, I did a quick AI overview, and it cites that decision for the court's 6-3 ruling in the Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus the President and Fellows of Harvard College and Students for Fair Admissions. Also, the University of North Carolina, it prohibits colleges from considering race as a factor in admissions. Okay. This is a big issue. I know that they said abortion was a huge issue, and then affirmative action. This was something that the conservative leadership was pushing very hard for. Now, this decision, it impacts the overruling overturns 45 years of legal precedent and ends a longstanding practice of colleges considering race during its admissions process. The decision's exceptions are the ruling allows colleges to consider how an applicant's race affected their life when discussing how they might contribute to the institution. And it's hard to get through that, but let me go ahead and show you very simply, because some people don't seem to understand exactly how this impacts us. All right, kind of difficult to get that on there. All right, very simple, because we've explained this so many times, and I really don't want to explain it too much or explain the process. So when I say systemic racism or any kind of systemic response, I want you to be able to understand and get this portion in your mind, okay? Because I'm already behind, all right? Now, the decision's implications. The ruling could have implications for kindergarten through 12th grade schools, race-based scholarships, counseling recruitment efforts, and promoting racial and ethnic diversity. Now, I want you guys to understand what that passage of that ruling has done, okay? Now, there's a systemic response. So we understand that in June of 2023, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the individuals who wanted to tear down the, like I said, the conservative leadership. They wanted to tear down the affirmative action. okay, that had an effect, almost an immediate effect. And like the gears, it started turning that wheel. Once that Supreme Court ruling wheel started turning, it turned the other wheels for the 2024 legal impact. So this is what it's impacting, okay? And we're nowhere in 2025. So you can see where 2003 has already started to roll. I think there's someone very concerned about the since January 1st or whatnot. And now they're the citizen review boards, about 15 citizen review boards that were operating in Florida alone were now for the over the local police or the police, they're now not working. Okay, so we can see that as that's a pullback, right? We also understand that even though there's a 2024 legal impact, there was a 2024 social impact. Okay, knowing that's going to turn the other wheels, which may be the 2025 uh, uh, social impact. So I just want you to understand how the wheels turn, that it's a systemic response, all right? Those are some very steep implications, as any intelligent man can see how this erodes the progress, which was made in the last 4 years. But we knew that this would happen, okay? Those who were actually standing back and looking at this as we were having a discussion years ago when we had some guests on this live stream. That was Ayana Verdi and John Verdi. Ayana articulated that there was this metaphor. She said that what we were seeing was the pendulum swinging. When I say actually because there were many people who were just, kind of playing the part, right? Now, that's why some of us met resistance in simple discussions that we were having years ago about what was actually going on in our country at that time, real time, and at that time in the country, okay? There were many people who were truly, technically, you can really call them liberal divestors. There were disingenuous actors in sheep's clothing pretending to be allies, and closet racists that were in denial. And I saw this about 2 years ago in all the live streams that I've been doing. All right, that's why you saw me communicate the word anti-black more now into the active practicing lexicon within all these discussions. Okay, now I saw this immediately, and when those people started trying to use those words woke and DEI as euphemisms, or what they truly wanted to say was they wanted to say the word black, the reference to the black race. So that's why I had that discussion years ago. I tried to get others to kind of see that, but for some reason they were picking up on it. All right. Now, to say the word black in that current climate was that was created as a result of the historical racism in America. All right. But it was tilted over by that 2020 murdering of George Floyd, which sent out a vibration um, that could be intercepted through technique. Okay, technique not that much different than the way sonar operates. So conservatives were looking for a way to acknowledge it without actually having to bring attention to the mainstream audience, right? Or bringing that conversation to the mainstream audience. Okay, um, that way they could have these watered down discussions without actually alerting any social activists who would be able to expose their dialogue for the disgusting and disguised demagoguery that it was the whole time. Okay, I and other conscious Black African American people recognize this as a part of a very complex design. It's a part of a well laid out propaganda campaign that's focused on socially instituting the concept of Black inferiority. Now, I remember talking about this specifically in one of the earliest episodes that we aired way back in 2020, 2020. Okay. Um, I talked about a book that everybody should read so that we are aware of this negative propaganda campaign that was being waged upon us, at least the melanated members of American society. All right. The name of that book was called Brainwash, Challenging the Myth of Black Inferiority. It was written by Tom Burrell, a former marketing communications industry leader who launched the advertising agency. And he did that through his expertise. So he was able to identify this negative propaganda campaign and its motivations. Now, Brainwash, Challenging the Myth of Black Inferiority is a critical reading that makes this discussion easier to have Okay, this book was one of the first resources that we told our audience would be a great entry into understanding any racial profiling and racial stereotypes. We told them back in 2020. Okay, now to get right to the point, many of the people placed in leadership positions are ignorant to the nuances of Black America and the current identity that it is personified with. This is why you see mediocre rhetoric used to discuss our issues. You've probably seen the weak and mediocre messaging coming from the Democratic Party, which failed to inspire its base in this last election cycle. And this is something very common as well as intentional. Okay. And let's not get excited and think that we're just going to jump all over, the American political party and excuse the ignorance that is obviously on display from the other side of the aisle also. Okay, so just acknowledging something. Now, I want you to really be honest about what you see when you witness these ignorant leaders engaging in these legislative debates on race in America before they understand the context of the main arguments. Okay, and maybe that's done intentionally, but painfully, it's a painful and obvious truth for some of us. All right, that's why on social media you see the social media content creator Conscious Lee. He says that they're lost in the sauce. All right. Some of the people who do this are expressing themselves from what they would call a racial resentment. And there are some people who are looking for the spotlight because they just feel left out. All right. Now, in either case, they reveal how lost they really are. Kind of like some of our members who were, dying to they had a dying itch to counter any issue of racial intolerance that I brought attention to throughout, these live streams. Now, as a person, it should not bother you if someone is against police brutality. I'll say that and make sure you understand that. It should not bother you if someone is against police brutality. I didn't say anything about just being against police. I said police brutality. You want to hear that? Likewise, it shouldn't bother you if someone is against racism. All right? It should bother you. It should bother any decent human being worth the salt of their body to be self-aware of themselves as well as the world around them. Now, here's something to think about. In the United States Army, there's a term that's called situational awareness. For short, situational awareness is a key principle to threat intelligence. Okay, situational awareness helps people recognize the early signs of any threats and employs them with the potential ability to be able to respond quickly to any of the potential dangers. Situational awareness is defined as the ability to identify, to process, and comprehend critical elements of information about an environment, particularly one that is variable and complex. Situational awareness enhances the ability to maintain a real-time understanding of the operational environment. Or simply put, situational awareness is just the ability to perceive and understand and effectively respond to one situation. It involves comprehending a given circumstance, gathering relevant information, which is why I'm always stressing to the audience comments, make sure you're relevant. Make sure your comments are relevant. I want the comments to be relevant to the discussion. Situational awareness involves analyzing that collected information and then making an informed decision to successfully address any of the potential risks or any hazards or any other events that may occur. And that's according to blackberry.com. So now, what is situational awareness in the United States Army is akin to being woke for African American society. Okay, of course, that could be debated because many have taken this word and they bastardized it for the last 3 years, the last 4 years, I believe. Okay, it's now used as a euphemism to deny progress. All right, now you can do an AI overview of situational awareness. You're going to come up with a lot, right? So I did that. I don't think I'm going to cover all that tonight, but I am going to say that woke for African American society, the conscious African American society, AKA the foundational Black Americans. It means to be socially aware of your physical environment, to be socially aware of your social environment, such as the workplace and the cultures that may exist within that workplace or anywhere else. It means to be socially aware of your political environment, as well as being socially aware of what's occurring in your community. Okay. Woke means to have a situational awareness at all times. All right. Let me go ahead and get this off the screen. So, like I said, woke means to have a situational awareness at all times if possible. That's where you guys who have perverted the term. I know I upset somebody, but that's where you guys who perverted the term, you now use it as a euphemism. You first heard it in the terms of a song that was warning us to stay woke. And I think that was Childish Gambino. You know, for some reason, it was like all of a sudden now you saw that the word exists, right? But the word has existed long before you paid attention to it. And that tells me that you weren't paying attention because you really didn't care. Okay. And that brings us to the point of this freestyle conversation tonight. All right. There was a job that brought me to Titusville on the 26th of November this year. Because I was in the neighborhood of an immediate family member, all right, I'll go ahead and say my brother. I decided to stop and see one of my nieces. And I have this kind of arrangement with my nieces that when they see me, I must give them a cookie upon request. Okay. Now I consider, that arrangement just to be a perk of having an uncle aunt. Okay. Now on the first night on that night, excuse me, I stopped by and I didn't have any cookies in my possession. All right. I got caught off guard. Usually I have cookies, but I didn't have any cookies this time on hand. And my niece and her siblings were like, where are the cookies? So it's like, oh, my niece specifically said she wanted shiny cookies. I was like, I don't have any cookies, but she said she wanted shiny cookies. And I couldn't do anything, but I just had to admit it. I forgot the cookies. I was like, I'm sorry, I forgot. I knew it was late. It was late when I came over, so I was, thinking about it. And I was like, oh, let me hedge this bet. I bet the Walmart's still open, right? And I could find those particular cookies that she was asking for, shiny cookies. I bet I could find them at Walmart, right? I wasn't sure what my niece really meant by shiny cookies. This is one of the first times she really said it, and I was like, what do you mean by that? But I was assuming she probably meant the cookies with sprinkles on them, right? Now, from past experience, I knew that her and her brother and her sister, they liked the sugar cookies from Publix. So I knew Publix was closed. So I was like, Walmart's got to be the place I got to go. So I was just hoping to find those shiny cookies. I took her to Walmart, all right? My niece and I, we found the shiny cookies in Walmart, or what she called the shiny cookies in Walmart. And yes, it was the one with sprinkles. And we happened to be at that Titusville Walmart. Everyone knows where that is, on the corner of Highway 50 and right next to 95, or Interstate 95. And we were walking back towards the self-checkout kiosk. And we encountered this man who was standing at the entrance. And he would start to engage in this conversation, referencing the recent news he had heard that you saw in the video about Walmart leading a trend of other companies who decided to roll back their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And they were doing this in anticipation for Donald Trump's second term. All right. Now, the conversation, all right, that the man was having not only referenced this rollback of policy, but it was my neighbor's cute son. But the conversation the man wasn't having only didn't just reference the rollback of policy. As we were walking to get back to the self-checkout terminal, the man immediately brought up that he heard that they're going to put Aunt Jemima back on the syrup bottle in the pancake box. I don't know what he meant by there, as in Walmart or the Pearl Milling Company, because in his mind, he may have thought it was Walmart's call, or maybe he was thinking that, some undisclosed part of Project 2025 agenda. Heck, I didn't know if it was part of some undisclosed part of Project 2025. I never got a chance to really read that. But I did watch other people try to read and discuss and try to interpret what it was. But at that point, either way, it didn't matter, who was subscribing to put the image of Aunt Jemima, the Mammy caricature, back on the shelf. At that point, I had a choice of ignoring the reasons that man brought it up, whether it was intentionally done because he saw me and my niece. And let me go ahead and show you what my niece looks like, just so anybody's wondering, right? Let me get this banner off before I put her on. So I want you to see what my niece looks like. So maybe you can kind of, some of those who may understand. There we go. All right, so if you saw me, right? You saw me walking with this little girl, okay? That's what this man saw. I just want to put that on there just so you can see. If you saw me walking with that little girl, this is what that man saw, okay? Now, I don't know if he intentionally saw me and my niece approaching, or whether he was just genuinely, truly interested in having that particular conversation with the self-checkout lane attendant at that precise particular moment. I thought about the issue for the rest of the night, and it kept on my mind a little bit because I was just like, that I had some comments to say, but I was really like, some people just are stone cold ignorant to the concept, and any kind of existence that is united in diversity. All right. Now, I was thinking a person like that has to be comfortable in intentionally displaying that kind of mental incompetence. And I was thinking in my head, I mean, to be honest, I was saying in my head, you can't be that stupid. All right. You can't be that stupid. Now, I got up the next morning and I went through my own routine because I have a routine every morning. Okay. And, I posted, I checked social media for news. I listened to, I asked my Google Nest to tell me the latest news and it will recite it. But then I asked it to play the local news just to find out what's going on before I, ever get moving out of the door. Right. Now, sometimes when I'm scrolling Facebook or whatever, I look at some reels while I'm listening to the news or whatnot, laugh. I may even play a game or something in that morning, depending on where I am in my routine. But this morning, I particularly was thinking about it, and I just went ahead and just posted. Very simple post, black and white. And I put Aunt Jemima as a symbol of oppression, not going back and forth about it on my Facebook news feed wall, just to state that. Now, I got a few relevant responses, and that's fine. Like I said, it's always okay when it's relevant. But I guess there was some confusion for some of the members. One of those members specifically was Lake Price, and we know how this guy is because I know him enough to, he's made a few dumb comments in the past. But I chose to put it in plain black and white for the remedial, right? Because I knew there would be somebody who was just serially ignorant, right? And those who can't climb that mental ladder called common sense, this is for you, okay? So let's walk through this because I encountered a few people who were still unaware of this, okay? Aunt Jemima is a symbol of oppression, right? Don't make a mistake and conflate this effort or the action to be conducted with any intent to bring you remedial and serial ignorant members along, right? Now, I told you back on December 3rd that it was past time that you people with those NPC, the non-playable character mindsets, be left behind. All right. Now, I talked about people who ask me a question and when I respond, they just sit there and like look at me funny and they don't process it. I don't even have time. Like if anybody personally knows me, have seen me the last few weeks, I've been like, I'm out. I don't even want to deal with it because if you ain't processing it, I'm tired. I have to move forward. I really am. Back in December, I did do a live stream too, and I talked about a particular video game character, a Metal Gear villain by the name of Metal Gear's solid villain by the name of Psycho Mantis. I talked about his choice and his ability to put on his mask to shield himself because he had these psychic thoughts and he didn't want the thoughts of others with this inauthentic NPC mindset. He didn't want that protruding into him, so he was using the mask to protect himself. And I just told you guys in December I was going to have to take for this new year. I was just going to take, not just a New Year's resolution, but just period. I knew that it was, because December was just kind of special, and I was just like, I'm going to have to take this approach when dealing with a lot of people, and I got to pull back. And the reason why is because some people are just not meant to evolve. Some people are just happy to drop anchor and hold you back from reaching the echelon that you're destined to ascend to. Okay, I don't have time to waste entertainment and inauthenticity. Okay, I don't have time to deal with any disingenuousness. Okay, I do have time to put out the truth about the idea about Aunt Jemima and her being a symbol of oppression, or how this image overall generally is a symbol of oppression. All right. Got to do something. I forgot to do something. I forgot to load up this photo. I forgot to load up this photo. Isn't that amazing? Let me go ahead and show you. Wrong photo. On there. Right. Now you can see O-Link responded, said Aunt Jemima has been around for 3 years. Any outdated complaints? Which, I rolled my eyes and I rolled my eyes and I was just like, no, this dude can't be, this dude back at it again. This dude can't be, he can't be real, right? But he is, because in Brevard County, you just like, you can't run from this place at all. Yeah, there's a delay on my computer. My tablet caught it. So let me go ahead and say it now. I rolled my eyes and I responded, Link, of course you're late to the table, as he always is. Put your ear to the ground and figure out the source to this one. I even gave who I'm calling now the Slozen one, okay? I gave him a hint. I said, tell your MAGA people it's outdated, right? It's antiquated. But he should have gotten a clue. But of course, his obliviousness and him being late to the table again. Aunt Jemima was a real person and beloved in her time. Okay, this is gonna get beautiful, right? Let me get this off real quick so we can get back to sharing the screen so we can get to the top of this. Getting that off. Right? Sorry for that. Wrong one. Now, fly through this too, probably. But here are the undisputable facts. All right. Aunt Jemima is portrayed by real persons. Right. Aunt Jemima is a racist caricature of a mammy. Right. Aunt Jemima is played by an Italian woman. She was played by an Italian woman named Teresa Gardelli. All right. She was played through blackface. She was played through blackface performance on theater stages. All right. Not a real person. Aunt Jemima was portrayed by a former slave of Montgomery County, Kentucky, Nancy Green. That's the most prominent one, right? When she was first introduced at a Columbian exposition in Chicago in 1893, and I'm not sure if that's 100% factual, but I did get that information from this book that I told you guys to get. Excuse me, on this side. Keep this page right here. This book that I told you to check out. All right, this is Brainwashed. So when I ask you guys to get the book, I read it. I ask you guys to get it, and I go back and I reference a lot of stuff all the time because some things, as you read it a second time, it comes more to life after you found out other information that's associated to it. And like I'm telling you, this book, read that one, and then read this one, which is post-traumatic slave syndrome. So when you start reading, you start seeing it. This makes so much more sense after you read this. This, when you read that, you can have the conversations now. The tough ones that you keep asking your friends, like, oh well, I'm not sure, I don't want to racially offend someone. But if you read them, just read a chapter, put it away for 2 months, pick it back up, read another chapter. It will still help you process. You will understand. Now, like I said, that fact that Nancy Green was introduced in the Columbian Exposition Chicago, I got that information from Brainwash, right? Now that may be challenging. This is great. This is why we can have these conversations. It's exactly why this is created, right? Now, Anna Robinson was another Black woman that was commissioned to play Aunt Jemima, right? Now, it would be worthy to note that the earliest advertising was based upon a light and very comedic, I'm going to say very, but a very comedic theatrical vaudeville parody, right? Now, this meant that Aunt Jemima is a racist caricature of a mammy, okay? Not a real person, but a racist archetype played by a real person. I need you to understand that, Link. I need you to pick it up. You need to be, actually, I don't need you to understand that. This is just a way of like throwing this information back at you because you truly are slow, okay? And the fact, and I say that because you're supposed to be in the education system teaching children this. And if you don't know this yourself and yet you're teaching, then we can see where you don't even meet the qualifications to actually have this discussion about the issue, right? But fear not, there's other people around you that you can ask and you can learn. I just showed you 2-3 different ways to make that happen again, okay? Now, we say, what is a caricature? Okay, we have 3 iterations of the definition of caricature. Okay, so hold on, let me go ahead and move that. A caricature is an exaggeration by means of an often ludicrous distortion of parts of characteristics. The key words are exaggeration and a distortion. Now, we defined this and had a very, very lengthy and informative discussion about this back in October of 2020, when we talked about T.D. Rice and the legacy of Jim Crow. Let me go ahead and get you that banner up here so you can do some research. All right. Simply just Google that. Whole bunch of information is going to come up. You're going to be inundated. Okay. But I specifically remember my co-host putting an effort into teaching those Panther and Cage viewers of the Brevard County community, specifically Thomas Dartmouth Rice how he created racial stereotypes that would lead into the hundreds of years of images that were detrimental to Black people. And that's when we talked about the 1820s and the minstrel, American minstrel phenomenon, right? I remember him specifically telling me and teaching the audience about that. We talked about that being a creation of T.D. Rice, right? All right. Give us some flickering there. But I just wanted to be able to make sure we got this right. As we see it. Oh, no. Get that off real quick. All right, good. Maybe we'll run a little smoother. Now, remember these images. You may not have been paying attention back then, but I gave you some time there. I need you to get a look at those two images that we highlighted for some of the key points to understand about the racial stereotype defined as the Mammy archetype. All right. The Mammy was portrayed as an asexual, overweight servant in a white household. Okay. She was portrayed as the help in a white household, but a perversion in her own household. Okay. She was a subdued and oppressed, subjected, non-threatening, keyword non-threatening maid. Okay. So when I say threatening, we're talking about your comfort, white comfort, right? There's a reason why she was defined that way. Now, for those of you still not tracking, a mammy is defined as an offensive, pejorative term, okay? One that is used to describe a Black woman serving as a nurse to white children. And remember that, especially formerly in the Southern US. But that's the Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary definition. And I say, but only because you must know that a Black woman serving as a nurse to white children, AKA a mammy, was not exclusive to the South, okay? That ideal was exclusive to the Southern US is only a half truth of many of the myths that are intentionally told about Black history, which burnishes through in reconciliation efforts today. Just looking for that. I think I got logged out of StreamYard. So let me try again, make sure. I'm sure there's some troubles out there and whatnot. Try to report me and whatnot, but in the hopes of education and passing this information along to those who are really allies. And for those other African Americans who are out there, if you call yourself African Americans, I know some of you call yourself Moorish, some of you call yourself Hebrew Israelites, some of you are tethers. This information is relevant to all of you. You need to know so you can be able to respond in the appropriate way. Sorry about this delay. It kicked me out. I gotta re-enter back in. But like I said, a mammy is an offensive and pejorative term. It's used to describe a Black woman who's serving as a nurse, or more than a nurse technically, to white children, especially formerly in the Southern U.S. All right, that was ugly. I think there was something going on with the share screen function. I don't think it likes to do it this way. I don't want to do it the other way. Because it's not as user friendly as I want it to be. All right. Sorry about all that technical difficulties there. A little strange sometimes. Now, like I said, the miseducation around the Mammy burns through today to reconciliation efforts today that we deal with. All right. Now, alleged educators, they misinform and miseducate our youth to the critical facts that are surrounding these issues. Now, some of the educators have historically made an excuse. Watching it, it's doing something funny. Now, some of the educators have historically made an excuse. An oppression like this was exclusive to the South. That it was only because it was only the South that was proud. Well, let me say, it was only the South that was actually proud to state that it was states' rights to own Black African Americans as chattel slaves, so or i.e. property, right? Somehow Link's response that Aunt Jemima was beloved in her time is foolishly acknowledging the social interests of mainstream white America and in local pockets like Titusville, Florida, to see Black women subjugated in a position and a status of servitude. Now, that's very important to understand that because we're going to be talking about respectability politics, right? Respectability politics. And so, yeah, I had to get that correct. Come on, you can do it. All right. All right, here we go. Somehow Link's response that Aunt Jemima was beloved in her time is a foolishly, it acknowledges the social interest of mainstream white America, okay? And in local pockets like Titusville, it follows suit, right? They love to see that. They love to see a Black woman subjugated in position and a status of servitude. And I say that, I'm accusing them of that early, but I'm gonna make my statements here. That's respectability politics first, okay? It's first and foremost. You need to understand this. We talked about this briefly before. This is one that'll keep coming up because that's what you're currently seeing when you see a Tim Scott put it before someone or Kamala Harris talking about well, certain reasons or ways that they start their conversations, all right? So even though I reason with Link with the fact that ain't your mama, okay, because that's what it is. Ain't your mama is ain't your mama. It's a racist reconstruction, all right? It's a Jim Crow era caricature, okay? Actually but it was played by Nancy Green. I don't think that Link immediately understood it. And I actually stated that Nancy Green was a real person, but Aunt Jemima was just a racist Mammy caricature. So that, you know, Link and other people who understand that there is an articulable distinction, right? One that must be recognized and respected when progressively having this particular conversation, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get this one out of here. I'm gonna let you see what Link says next, right? I got another hour. Whew, had to get through that. It's tough. Apologize. Now, The ignorance began to flow like it always does with this dude and most other people, because I know he's speaking for a couple other people too, right? And ignorance began to flow like water, the same water that flowed from the rock after Moses struck it. That's how it flowed, right? Just like, wow, it's a miracle. How can this happen? Link responds, Nancy Green played Aunt Jemima, and she was beloved in the role, misspelling role, as were many others who played the Mammy caricature. Aunt Jemima is a Mammy caricature, but one could say that she and others playing a role to help break down racial barriers. Not only did he just repeat that, what I said, what I had already told him at the risk of being redundant, but Link then makes this bold claim that Nancy Green and others playing Aunt Jemima, Mammy caricature, helped break down racial barriers, and further explains how this is done. He says Mammies were generally well thought of by whites at the time, and they were based off of real people at the time. I call BS, right? And even if that was true, as if that is a respectable feat. Okay, remember we talking about respectability politics. Remember earlier this month when I live stream, I told my audience about respectability politics, right? Well, this is an example of that. Now he goes on spewing, okay? You can hate Aunt Jemima, but she was a positive encounter with blacks for generations of whites and played a role in reducing hate, even though she was a racist caricature. Now it's a shame, okay, because you're playing respectability politics here. It's a shame for your praising any mediocre status, right? I could see some African Americans doing that because it's debatable within our community. That's something interculturally that we deal with, right? But for you to praise that mediocre status, that's when you dug a hole and you can't get out of it. Except either to say, one, you're ignorant to this and you're just trying to stay above water in this little exchange, or two, you back yourself into a corner and you're trying to defend a similar racial oppression, or three possibility here, okay? Because I like to be very, look at variables when it comes to these things. He certainly thought that he was legitimate, or that it was a legitimate response in this post, right? So for the sake of the possibility that it was number three, all right, I asked for some standards. For the sake of clarity, accuracy, and just plain old fairness, beloved in the role of demeaning Mammy caricature? Elaborate, and please point out who that is in your circle, bravado or otherwise, that would actually say that the role of a Mammy caricature would break down racial barriers. How would they break down those racial barriers? And I want you to explain that. What racial barriers did the Mammy caricature break down? But before I get to his response, okay? Get a load. I just want you to pay attention. Take a look at this upper right portion of the image that's on the screen. All right, this is the image of Anna Robinson's portrayal of Aunt Jemima. Okay, you can see her as you've seen the others, like Nancy Green's version, wearing the scarf or the handkerchief over the head, right, over the hair. Now, we talked about that before too. We talked about that being the result of class warfare that was conducted to force Black women to visibly display that they were a part of the slave class. Now that's instituted through Black codes, so that the visitors or the suitors to the southern United States from Europe and anywhere else, they would not select or even try to court the Black women for marriage. Okay, you get this on here. Black codes, all right, French Code Noir, all right, was instituted because the Black women were getting passed over, excuse me, because the white women were getting passed over, and and Black women were being selected, right? White women demanded legislation be instituted to force Black women to wear a covering over their heads, so that would display that they were a part of the slave class. Okay, so I said class warfare, right? If you want to know more about that, specifically, you're going to have to look up the Tignan law. Okay, there it is. So I need you to go back, do some research, look at that. That's a very controversial one. Just look at the Tignan law, and you'll get some more information. All right, I'll leave that on for just a second. All right, need it longer, you're gonna have to just rewind. Okay, got to move forward. Now, what you need to know is significant is that Mammy archetype is the most well-known racial caricature of Black African American women, and it's obviously what somewhat subjective as to the definition. Why? Some Black people will tell you it's because they used to say your mammy was part of it, like a little insult, and culturally, you know, it could be. There's other reasons, but like I said, it's very subjective, right? Very, it can be debated. But as a Black man interested in embracing the truth about our nation's history, I can share that the obvious interest of the image or the graphic representation of the mammy was to influence antebellum American society. And it was done to influence the antebellum American society into believing that Black women were happy to be slaves and servants to white families. I think you even expressed that. We'll cover that over again, right? That effort would serve as a purpose to comforting those families. Comfort, always about your comfort, right? Into believing that the Black African American women in social standing would get no higher than the slave or servant, and that it was not, you know, a normal, you know, a morally destitute action for you to discriminate against them. Okay, there's even a girl on TikTok who's talking about this as being internalized in white women. So it's one of the reasons why I don't want to ban TikTok. But the narrative that the Black women were happy to be slaves or servants to white families serves social, political, and economic interests of the mainstream white America. And you kept saying at that time, right? And even after that emancipation of slaves in the 1860s, right? America fought hard to reject the idea that post-slavery Black African American women played a more important role in their own household than that when they would put it in as far as the white households. Okay, when in comparison, they played more of an important role in a white household than they did in their own household. That's how discriminative and destitute the action of this was, right? In the last series of live streams, I made sure to talk about the Willie Lynch letter and what the intention of the future Black woman was as far as that, right? We talked about, you know, it wanting to psychologically freeze the minds of Black women and reversing the nature of Black women. Now, the most important information I can present here can be found on your own if you're genuinely interested in making the effort, Link, okay? But I know you're not, because you just like to try to reply to me, right? You could easily find out these things if you just pull up a dictionary. Go to the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary and just look at the etymology of the word. Actually, I got to get me an Oxford dictionary because I haven't had one. I've always had to use the one in the public library. But anyways, you really want to know the etymology of anything, go to the Oxford Library first, or the Oxford, not library, but go to the Oxford Dictionary first and look at it. And then you'll find that you have to go other places because there is a linguistic issue that we can't even talk about because we're not ready for that, okay? But the etymology of the word mammy was first known to be used in 1523, all right? Seeing as how the mammy archetype was documented to be first seen in the 1830s, according to Merriam-Webster, there's obviously something further to be discussed here, right? That's what I'm saying. All that information, there's more to be discussed. We can't even have that conversation because you're not at that mental level, okay? You could look up the history of the mammy on Google or Wikipedia, and you could easily come to the understanding that the mammy archetype was implemented to exploit Black African American women's utility. Okay? Now, I want to tell you, look at this example of Mama Molly. All right? Mama Molly. I never even heard of her until I looked her up. And I didn't really look her up. I just looked up Mammy, right? Found it on Wikipedia. And I found her image on Wikipedia, and you want to know what else I found? I found more evidence that verified what I said earlier. All right. White slaveholding families believed that keeping Black African American women in a social standing no higher than slave or servant was not a morally corrupt action. All right. I found a diary belonging to one of her slavers. All right. And her slavers were the Partridge family of Jefferson County. Okay. That's here in Florida, Jefferson County, Florida. Now, the Partridge Family of Jefferson County, Florida. You Google that, it should come right up, right? You're gonna find a documented letter at the Library of Congress, right? So it's documented that Mama Molly nursed nearly all of the children of her family, and it said they loved her as a second mother. Think about that. She nursed nearly all the children of the Partridge family, and they loved her as a second mother. And in the diary, it says that she was black of skin but pure of heart. She doubtless stands among the faithful on the right side of the king. So when Link says that the Mammy character served as a positive encounter with blacks for generations of whites, it is called into question when you roll out the facts and that the documented empirical evidence, like Henry E. Partridge's excerpt in his diary, that pathologizes Mama Molly's blackness by meaning bound to malicious intention, deceitful, and corrupt, right? That's what the blackness meant to him. It meant that it's bound to malicious intentions, it's bound to deceitfulness, it's bound to being corrupt. Black, but pure of heart. Black, but pure of heart. Black, but she was pure of heart, though. That's you don't see the mediocrity in that. Actually, you do. I know you're just playing a game, but this is what I'm talking about. And the reason why this is important, everybody, is I want you to understand. I want you to know that these are the kind of things that we deal with in the workplace. And then they say that wasn't racist. That wasn't racist. Before I move forward, I want you to take a look at this image, okay? We understand the Mammy figure, like a Mama Molly, basically was good enough, to suckle your children, right? They're good enough to nurse your children, but they weren't good enough to stay in the same room. They weren't good enough for them to be, like having a status that is above you. They cook for you, they clean for you, they nurse your kids, whatever. It was supposed to be believed that they were happy to do this. No, get out of here with that. Get out of here with that. That's one of the most powerful images, and you need to keep that in your mind. Here she is nursing, not her. This isn't about Molly nursing. It's just another adaptation. It's something that actually is pre-1860, I believe. But you see her there with the white child attached to the nipple. That's what being a mammy is. That right there says so much. It says so much. So let's review and talk about something associated to give some more depth, right? I'm going to remind you that the Reconstruction era was a contentious part in our nation's history, where the country was forced to reconcile its anti-Moorish and its anti-Black behavior, or its anti-Moorish, anti-Black culture, and rebuild its identity, okay? Because Abraham Lincoln's assassination and Andrew Johnson's white supremacist background, many of the Reconstruction era plans were failures. Instead of reparations for the formerly enslaved, their slave owners were compensated, right? So they were given, some of them were given their land back because they stole it. There's a process to that, so that can be discussed. Some of them were given money to compensate them for losing slaves. They got reparations. The slave owners got reparations, okay? And instead of civil rights protections for African Americans or for Black people, the freedmen, the newly freed, they used to be former slaves, Black codes were passed, okay? That's what the code noirs, the Black codes I was talking about. The Mammy character, that Mammy archetype, was posited as a part of that Reconstruction era propaganda agenda to sell the image of a Black woman as an instrument or a tool of submission, right? And then they commercialized the image to sell that image on consumer products, like you see on this image here, right? Once white American society had grown to fetishize the image of an overweight, asexual maid figure, and it's not made up, because you can see it here. This is just a sample. This is another, it's a very derogatory term, but for tonight's conversation, I gotta address it, right? If you remember back in October 2020, we also talked about how white American media commercialized the Sambo and the Pickaninny images, and then they use those images along with the Mammy to sell products as well, all right? Now that was a part of, and I remember at the time addressing the lost cause, right? That's where you address the lost cause and the propaganda that was set up for purposes of lost cause, pushing it, right? Now, what was that? Why did they do that? Exploitation. Much of white America's preferential connection and fetishization of the Mammy archetype is about their inner perspective of how they believe Black women should exist. Okay? Plain and simple, Aunt Jemima image is a commercialized image of a racist distortion of a Black woman, a Mammy archetype, and is used to extort. All right? Not only was Nancy Green or any of the other women who portrayed Aunt Jemima never compensated for the Pearl Miller Company, or at the time, I believe it was RT, I forgot what it was called. I'm having a brain fart right here. But any of the people who played Nancy Green or any other people that portrayed the Aunt Jemima Mammy caricature were not compensated for the use of their image, all right? But there were millions of dollars that was generated using those images, and it's never going to compensate their descendants either. Okay, that failure of recompense is important, because watch what happens when the following claims that were made. Just watch this. Apologize, I didn't have it loaded up. This is the heart of this. All right, take a look. Much of white America's preferential connection to fetishization of the Mammy archetype is about their perspective. That's important for us to understand, okay? So how they see us, how they want to see us, right? I'm not saying all, just the majority that remain silent, while the others are loudly speaking this out in certain ways of when they're trying to hold on to these racial stereotypes like the Mammy archetype. All right. The first thing that Link did was invoke Hattie McDowell, right? You're probably wondering who that is, but let's get through it, right? The first thing that Link did was invoke Hattie McDowell. But I'm sure he meant Hattie McDaniel, the singer actress who was the first Black African American to win an Oscar, because Link said that Hattie McDowell played a Mammy in Gone with the Wind and was so well liked that she won an Oscar. He said they made special exceptions for her at the many segregated hotels in the 1940s. The Mammy caricature was created to glamorize the lives of slaves and oppose abolition. But the caricature was endearing to whites at the time. People like Nancy Green and Hattie McDowell were taking a racist caricature and using it as a way to break down racial barriers. He said, I don't know enough about Nancy Green, but I do know that Hattie was fully aware of it. I know growing up, I didn't know about the history of Mammies, but there was a Black woman sitting on the table, smiling at me as I ate delicious food. This was too good to be true. This is just way too good to be true. Okay. This is one of the dumbest responses I came across last year. I can't believe this guy is allegedly a teacher in the Brevard County school system. But then again, after the whole Moms for Liberty thing and everything that I've been seeing, I can believe it after seeing all that circus, that's the public school board of the meetings and all that stuff. The man said the Mammy caricature was created to glamorize the lives of slaves and oppose abolition, which is true. But his immediate rebuttal, but the caricature was endearing to whites at the time. Endearing to whites. It was endearing that a Black African American singer slash actress to play a role designed to keep Black people from having the ability to access equality of employment opportunities. You're teaching, you didn't know that. You have to consider when you say at that time, you kept saying it, you're referencing in the Reconstruction slash Jim Crow era, a time when those subservient roles were the only roles that a Black African American could play because of American socially discriminative culture. Heck, we talked about a Chitlin circuit. They couldn't even play on the same movies for so long. They made them travel separately. They gave them different shows. They were different because of segregation, because of Jim Crow segregation, right? That was the socially discriminative culture I'm referencing, right? To substantiate that, remember, this is the primary reason for blackface performances, all right? Because they wouldn't let Black people be seen on movies. They wouldn't let them be, they wouldn't let them in movies with white people. We talked about this. They did that well into the 1920s. Blackface, hey, we just had a firefighter 2 or 3 years ago that came to a party in blackface. Come on, man. You don't remember how detrimental that is? You don't understand that? And then remember at the start of this live stream, I told you about Teresa Gardella. Look her up. You can just Google this stuff. It'll come up. You can use the Wikipedia. It'll come up. That Italian woman, Teresa Gardella, she portrayed Aunt Jemima through blackface.
That was easy.
It ain't hard, bro. It ain't hard. You ain't even my bro. You should be embarrassed anyway. This is the kind of racism that exists that's right now in the school system. That's why when we started seeing the Zoom calls and stuff during the COVID and everything, we start seeing all these teachers saying the N-word and messing up and stuff. That's why they want cell phones in the classroom. I'm gonna tell you, part of that was the reason why they didn't want the cell phones, because of that, because they were getting exposed. You could take them phones and use them as a learning device, because you look what you just learned tonight. You got a supercomputer in your hand and you don't want to use it. It's a tracking device also, but you don't want to use it, right? This man said he does know that the image of Aunt Jemima comforted him because he was sitting across, looking at her while eating good food, sitting at his table looking across while eating good food. He said a Black woman, right? You know you can't invite a Black woman to breakfast, right? If you want to see a Black woman so bad while sitting across eating good food. In fact, you can go ask a Black woman to cook for you, and you're probably going to get you some good. There's ways around that, right, bro? But I digress. Here's an example of what I said earlier, right? Much of white America's preferential connection or their fetishization of the Mammy archetype is about their inner perspective of how they believe that Black women should exist. Okay, they're always worried about our behavior. In fact, they passed so many laws worried about our behavior. Although that racially oppressive image of the Mammy archetype brought you comfort, truth is that image didn't break down any real racial barriers. It normalized them. That's the difference. It normalized the positions of mediocrity that those Black codes instituted across the South had intended. There were some Black codes that stated that after emancipation, a free Black person in American society could only work in positions of servitude, such as a butler, a shoe shiner, a handmaid, or a housemaid. Matter of fact, I'm gonna say that again, but give it a second. I'm gonna give you the visual, because sometimes some people just they don't understand it. They don't get it. They don't get it. I'm referencing South America, not South America, but South Carolina here, because that is where the slave plantation that produced some members of my family. Okay, so we want you to understand. So let me say this again while you watch and while you read this. So let me get you so you understand this right. Right? There were some Black codes that stated that after emancipation, a free Black person no longer in slavery, a free Black person in American society could only work in positions of servitude. Servitude such as a butler, such as a shoe shiner, such as a handmaid or a housemaid. That's why you saw Black servitude movies and portrayals of Black servitude in movies like Driving Miss Daisy, The Help, and The Butler. All those movies, they gave so many awards. They loved it. Why? Why? I'll tell you why. Because images like the Sambo, images like the Pickaninny, and images like the Mammy, it typecasted Black people and ultimately perpetuated the idea and the belief that Black people were condemned by God to be the servants of white people. It perpetuated white supremacy. It perpetuated Black inferiority. It didn't break down racial barriers. It perpetuated them. In a world filled with imagery designed to belittle Blacks, it's what you said. These beloved stereotypes. I can't believe you put that in quotes. These beloved stereotypes, while irritating many Blacks, were softening the hearts of racist whites and helping to open doors for future generations. To me, the canceling of Aunt Jemima is like Blacks that demonize Uncle Tom's Cabin, forgetting that it was written by an abolitionist and the role it played in abolition of slavery. That book also featured a Mammy caricature. Duh. What do you say? Mammies, while used by racists to mock Blacks, were beloved by whites in no small part because of the charming women that played them. This fact was exploited by those battling slavery and segregation. The Mammy caricature was an interesting place in history among Black caricatures as the one that might have done as much good as much harm. If your intellectually fragile, told-minded mentality couldn't reveal more mediocrity, it was right there. You're trying to defend a symbol of racial oppression. You're trying to defend a symbol of racial oppression, and in the process of doing so, you couldn't even get Hattie McDaniel's name correct, let alone understand the complexities of respectability politics. Hattie McDaniel was so well liked that you couldn't get her name right. I want to point that out to you. You had to read that crap somewhere. You had to do it recently, and you just decided to throw that in there when you were talking about, these special exceptions for Hattie McDaniel at many segregated hotels in the 1940s. We covered that. We talked about that back in October of 2020. I remember stating to the audience that she wasn't even allowed to be sitting at the table in the room with their cast members waiting to accept the award. And in fact, if you want to take a look at her accept that award, they brought her through. I think she was sitting at a table on the side of the wall. I think that's common knowledge if you actually pull up your computer and look at it. But I think she was sitting on the side. One documentation says that she was sitting on the side, or many documentation said she was sitting at a table on the side of the wall on the far back. Okay, segregated in a room. Hotel was basically had a no Blacks policy. Okay, and then another documentation says she was in another room, in a whole nother room, that they pulled her through the door. Okay, so I got that link if you want to see that. And you can see the acceptance on YouTube. Anybody want to know? I got that link. I can give that, put it in the comments. You can take a look at it. But there's I just wanted to point that out because there was some special exception, right? And then let's talk about briefly, let's just mention that her Oscar is missing. There's a whole scandal behind her Oscar being missing. They've been missing for some time now. I just noted they just, last year said that they were going to replace it. So what happened to the original one? Someone denied her even having that. I think she donated it to Harvard University, and then it turned up missing. Let's talk about, that's the discussion we should be talking about, right? But listen to the mediocrity that you spoke before this man put pen to paper, or in this case, poop to post. He said beloved stereotypes, in quotes. He said beloved stereotypes, while irritating many blacks, were softening the hearts of racist whites and helping to open doors for future generations. Yeah, we're gonna pull that back up again, because I meant to show that so y'all can see what I was saying, what he was saying, right? So let me quickly go over to some of this stuff. Let me give you some of these. Let me give Link and everybody else out there, the viewer audience, a chance. Anybody who agrees with him or could have said something similar or misunderstood anything. Let me give y'all a reminder of what the goal and the purpose of Reconstruction era was, and how some of the failures resulted in the institutional and systemic racism that still impacts our American society today. Now, the primary goal of the Reconstruction era was reunification. All right, it was a reunification of the North, the Union North, and the Confederate Rebel South, right? And that was after the Civil War, just bringing them back together, right? Or supposedly. The Reconstruction era's main purpose was to govern the ways in which the Southern states would be reunified with the Northern states at the end of the American Civil War. Now, remember I mentioned earlier that Abraham Lincoln's assassination and Andrew Johnson's white supremacist background. I talked about how that being a cause of the failures of the Reconstruction era plans. Well, to give a little more context, Abraham Lincoln directed our nation to rebuild its identity, okay? One of the aims was to abolish slavery, all right? Another was to provide rights for freedmen or Black African Americans in the reunified United States of America, okay? Because remember, they were trying to say it was the Confederate States of America, the CSA. Google that and you can pull up a lot of information there, right? But I remember a few years ago, Link proclaimed that Black African Americans shouldn't be celebrating Juneteenth because one of the major achievements of Reconstruction era was the passage and the ratification of the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And he was specifically talking about the 13th Amendment, okay? So let's go over the achievements. Let's look at that. He said the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was an achievement, right? And let me get this so you can see it, all right? We're going to talk about some of these achievements, right? Yes, the facts are that the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution were achievements. However, depending on your ethnic background, how you feel about that being successful achievement is subjective. Now, I already talked in depth about the 13th Amendment not truly abolishing slavery a year ago, all right? That it only transformed the institution of slavery into a punishment. All right, a punishment that a citizen would have to incur if they were convicted of a crime. And we can always have that discussion here if the audience members are willing to participate and to appropriately participate. But the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution granted citizenship rights. All right, the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution afforded Black African American freedmen the right to vote, a right afforded to minorities because of the struggle of the Black African Americans, aka the foundational Black Americans. Now, theoretically, these amendments were conditional, and the conditionality is what generates the conversations in the concerned corners of our Black African American communities, like the condition of the 13th Amendment that I just mentioned. Neither slavery or involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof a party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, is a condition that impacted American society by influencing the criminalization of Black African American people. The Reconstruction era had many failures that would negatively impact the rights of Black African Americans. According to study.com, one failure occurred in 1877 when the Republicans capitulated to the Southern Democrat demands regarding the removal of the federal troops from the former Confederate territories. All right, remember that. Let me get this off the screen because I want you to remember that. All right. In 1877, Republicans capitulated to Southern Democratic demands. They wanted the federal troops removed. In fact, they defunded the Reconstruction era around that time, but we'll get to that in a second. So, but that removal of the federal troops from the Confederate territories, what would that do, right? The reason why I mentioned that, brought that up, is because it's an example that will be found when we're having a conversation about the Devil's Punch Bowl, okay? And I'm not talking about the one in Pear Blossom, California, or the one in Otter Rock, Oregon. I'm talking about Natchez, Mississippi. All right? I want y'all to understand this, okay? I'm talking about Natchez, Mississippi, where a Union-controlled soldier concentration camp was held to freed slaves or freedmen from the American Civil War, right? Now, for years, I've been waiting to have that specific conversation about that, right? But we're going to cover the Devil's Punch Bowl more in depth in the future, all right? I delayed that conversation and continue to delay the conversation because at that time, I didn't want to bulldoze those initial audience members who were displaying white fragility whenever we talked about smaller discussions that were centered around Black African-American contribution and achievement. And when I say Black African-American contribution and achievement, I'm talking about, we talked about this, how Black African-Americans, freedmen, started Memorial Day. They started it and it was called Decoration Day, right? They started the entire tradition, all right? It later became known as Memorial Day. One of the other achievements, and this is what brought Mr. Link Price out in the initials in the beginning, was Juneteenth. Okay, they started a tradition celebrating emancipation. So celebrating Juneteenth was like victory. Okay, it was like, hey, we have a reason to celebrate. You know, the Emancipation Proclamation is victory. That's how they saw it. But instead of seeing this and understanding that was a victory celebration, Mr. Link Price decided to tell us that we should be celebrating the ratification of the 13th Amendment, not understanding that that is the reason why the prison boom actually happened, and then the criminalization of Black people, whatever, and then that's where all those negative stereotypes came. But I'm going too far for myself. Let me go back to addressing the Devil's Punch Bowl real quick. For years, I've been waiting to have that conversation, but I didn't want to, address it at a time because we kept seeing people get upset about trivial facts about Memorial Day or Juneteenth. Every time we mention Black African American contribution or achievement, somebody gets upset, and out of their comfort zone. But ultimately, that discussion, is going to deal with the discussion about the Devil's Punch Bowl is going to deal with the Union Army and how they were ordered to leave because of that 1877 failure, right? They decided to resolve the issue that they had of having all these formerly enslaved people. They decided to keep them there in that camp. It was considered it was an internment camp, so they considered it a death camp because how they chose to deal with it was they wanted to force the slaves or to force the former slaves to starve and to die of diseases, right? The Union Army covered up the entire camp with dirt, burying the freedmen in a mass grave. Now, the area is known for its wild peach groves. Okay, so look up Natchez, Mississippi, wild peach groves. The area is known for those wild peach groves, right? And they produce some of the world's largest, or not the world, I would say the nation's largest peaches. But the locals in the area will not eat the peaches because they know that the peaches were fertilized with the bodies of those dead freedmen. So in that instance, all my conservatives, the Republican Union soldiers have blood on their hands as well. All right. All right. The most relevant failure of the Reconstruction era was the Jim Crow legislation that would negatively impact Black African American communities. The Black codes that were established were the precursor to the Jim Crow laws, and they were explicitly designed to place hurdles for freedmen and women. All right. There were vagrancy laws and labor contract laws that forced some of the freed Black African Americans back into involuntary labor. All right. And I also want you to understand that the difference between the Jim Crow laws as well as the Black codes. Black codes were like those small codes or whatever that were put in place just to basically keep our behavior, just to keep us there until they could legislate, state laws. And then at that point, that's where the Jim Crow laws actually became like the, systemic legislation, such as covenant laws and stuff like that. That's where that came into play, right? Like I said, this is where the discriminalization of the Black African American communities became a Southern Democratic strategy, though, right? That's where we talked about the lost cause, right? Another evidence of systemic function, right? We talked about the Southern Democratic function to get the slaves back. Why? So they get them back and potentially get back their plantations or get them back on the plantations, those who had the plantations, right? So the conditions of the 13th Amendment I mentioned earlier must be kept in mind when we're talking about that. Slavery should not exist except for conviction of a crime, right? So I want y'all to remember that this was the reasoning behind America's first prison boom, as well as the chain gang, as well as debt peonage, as well as convict leasing, sharecropping. All of that was having to play at the same time following emancipation in 1865. Give me 1 second. They needed propaganda that would push and portray Black African Americans in negative ways so that it could be easier to disenfranchise those Black people, right? When I say disenfranchise, I mean taking power away from them, right? To remove political and economic gains. That, when Candace Owens screams that we Republicans, we had senators. There are some people who were Black Republican senators. So we had a lot of people taking office. We had some people, there were cities being, villages being built, etc. But those were gains, right? Political and economic gains. They needed a reason to push to take that away. So they pushed propaganda, right? They wanted a way to use this propaganda to also legitimize the violence of vigilante justice. I talked about vigilante justice years ago. Okay, talked about that. All right, so this is where the stereotypical representations of the Jim Crow era were created, and Black African Americans were branded with a series of stereotypical images that influence racist tropes. If you want to know more about that, any racist tropes, do you think there are many, because there's talk. I think Sergeant WP actually talked about the sapphire recently in a live stream that he had done. Those who who it is, I would suggest that you really would look him up. But I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the comments. Again, they did update the website. It's a little more difficult now, but you could just go and read. You can find it, use the search function. I talked about this before. You want to be educated on this stuff, right? Now, here's where I gotta move forward on this, right? Because I gotta go. I got a few minutes before I go. And I want you to pay attention to this, okay? I'm gonna start talking to Link and anybody else who agrees with him at this point. Link, I dare you to be honest, all right? Don't take the position of standing outside and just peeking through the window, through the blinds of the window of the Black community soul like a coward. What pisses you off about Black men and women exercising their constitutional right to protest? I don't know. I would like you to tell. I would like anybody to tell me what pisses you off about Black men and women exercising their constitutional right to protest. I got one friend who I only accept. She says that she don't like them destroying and tearing property up. That's debatable because some of that was other actors, and we know about the Antifa and all that stuff. So that's like a subjective, and I get it. Okay, we can have a conversation there. But I need to know what pisses you off about Black men and women exercising their constitutional right to protest. All right, because y'all had a problem with Colin Kaepernick, and I can have that discussion too, right? But what is your opinion about how Sidney Poitier's portrayal, since you love Hattie McDowell so much, can me get her name right? If you think that she broke down racial barriers, what is your opinion on how Sidney Poitier's portrayal of Virgil Tibbs when he slapped Larry Gates, his character, Eric Endicott, in the heat of the night? How did that make you feel? How did that make your grandfather feel? What is it significant to you? Okay, did that break down any racial barriers, or did that perpetuate them? That's what you need to do. Answer that. What mediocre and stereotypical images you found as endearing, I find infuriating, because I have to ask myself, could it be that the comfort that you receive from the images and portrayals of the Black servitude, they are a result of a very hidden inner ideal of a society where you can blurt out something like "get in your place, darky," and not receive any kind of negative consequence? As the only purpose for Black Americans is to fulfill some sort of utility facilitating white comfort. And I don't want anyone in the audience or any viewers to come look at this later and try to claim that I'm being a bully when I call him out on this, right? Because he said, quote unquote, beloved stereotypes, which means that he finds those stereotypes endearing, right? Y'all was talking about make America great again or whatever, like, you know, we talk about, are you talking about that era? Where you found that endearing because you still find it endearing, or to see a white woman, a Black woman sitting at your table while you eating, you know, as a white man, you're sitting there, you're eating good food, that brings you comfort? Link, you and a lot of other white men, white women too, some of them, y'all are campaigning for Black inferiority and you don't even realize it. Or maybe you realize it and you decide to be ignorant, do it anyway. And that makes sense, right? But your arguments are in defense of a symbol of racial oppression that exclusively came from the Reconstruction era propaganda machine, the same dang-on machine that the United Daughters of the Confederacy used to miseducate the Southern public education system, let alone what Rockefellers did. It was their intent to ensure that the South shall one day rise again. This means that they want a new effort from the Confederacy. The South shall rise again meant that the heart of the Confederacy never died. That's why you saw that Confederate flag waving as someone carried it through the Capitol's rotunda on January 6th. Now, you may not have the ability that gives you insight as into who may be the internal enemy to the American tenets of democracy, but I'm telling you that if you don't pay attention, you might be staring at the face of the enemy of the Democratic Republic who you're flirting with, okay? To say that I don't, or to say that I do have to be wise enough to employ some of the tenets of the art of war, and to recognize that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And seeing how your behavior is on code for at least a low-key passive racist, I need to inform you that I see you and I see what you're trying to do, all right? You're trying to hold the most common stereotypical representation, the Mammy archetype, which perpetuates the existence of mediocrity for Black women in the Black community. It's how you want to see us. It also threatens the potential of young Black women to exist in what is known or what is considered as Black excellence. These mediocre images help to push negative narratives that are expedient to the interest of white supremacy. We've known this since the Lost Cause influenced anti-Black propaganda. Holding on to the stereotypical representations that perpetuate Black inferiority in turn creates environments, cultures that are harmful to Black African Americans, like Ahmaud Arbery, like Trayvon Martin and Rasheem Carter. It starts with the stereotypical representations. It continues with the actions like that of Jonathan Pentland, or remember Matt Rowland, or what about Edward Matthews? And then there was Lee Jeffers, or even to the point that, remember the plainclothes police officers that arrested the public defender, Jamie Tillotson, for her just doing her job? Yeah, that's what happens with it. It ultimately culminates in the kind of hatred that believes that resolution to diversity is to create a white ethno-state through accelerationism. And we as a community need to expose it. We need to call it out and combat it by speaking power to truth about what will be accepted or tolerated. Because that crap link is gone with the wind, bro. It's gone with the wind. To the members of the Black African American community, Elgin, a lot of us, man, we need to stop creating spaces of white comfort for passive racists. All right, we just got to stop. That's where we are now. That's what they want to do. This is where the pendulum swings right now. We have to stop making spaces of white comfort for passive racists. All right, and we got to stop accepting the same rhetoric from those same people. Right? I don't have to tell you how dangerous it is, or at least I shouldn't have to tell you how dangerous it is. But we need to be able to tell our own stories. I read an article with Dar Star Tucker, and one of the comments said that we got to tell our own stories in our own way, and I believe it. We have to tell our own stories and tell those stories in our own way without mediocrity, without the mediocrity of those stereotypes and superficial anti-Black narratives that drive the concept of Black inferiority. All right, now we can have a huge conversation about that in the future. I know we do oftentimes when we talk about Tyler Perry movies and whatnot. That's the heart of what it is. That's that discussion that needs to have when it comes to that. How can we tell our stories without having, I know you're giving jobs to certain Black actors who haven't been in circulation for a while. We know that there's a machine, because I just saw a video where an individual, a very prominent Black African individual, is no longer like in the rotation in movies. I know that's an issue. But that's the conversation that we're trying to have. How do we tell our stories in a way without the mediocrity of these stereotypes, without these superficial Black narratives that's supposed to be driving these, that drive the creation of these movies? Once we can have those conversations interculturally between ourselves, then we can reach for Black excellence, we reach for more. All right, so it's important to understand that. And I just wanted y'all to see this and understand this is important. So if you want to get offline, because I know many of you will do that. You hate coming in here and leaving comments. You hate actually watching it and live, whatever, you watch it later, because there's no reason why I would have 325 views within 2 days and not one single comment. Like, even tell me if you hated it and what reason you hated it. But I have to go. There's some stuff I got to take care of. Someone I got to pick up, very important. And I need to go take care of that. I just wanted to bring this information to my audience and make sure that they understand that this is a relevant issue. This is an issue that we need to talk about. Okay, we need to make sure these people, whatever, who want to use these racial stereotypes or whatnot, these old antiquated images of racial injustice and racial oppression, we need to stop making spaces for them. Okay, they need to let it go. All right, that stuff is gone with the wind. No pun intended. Actually, it is intended. All right. But I wish everyone well. All right. I wish you all love, authentic love. I wish you enduring peace, and may the Most High guide your path.